Great. Thank you all. Thanks. Those were terrific presentations. So I think we'll jump to some questions now. If that sounds okay to the LifeSci folks. Tara, is that your expectation?
Yep, that sounds good. Thanks, Marvin. At this time, we'll be conducting our question and answer session with our speakers that will be moderated by Chuck Padala of LifeSci Advisors. As a reminder, if you would like to submit a question, you may do so by using the Q&A text box at the bottom of the webcast player or by emailing your questions to questions@lifesciadvisors.com. Please go ahead, Chuck.
I think I'm going to steal the microphone from Chuck here, Tara, but that's okay. So let's take a step back into the economics here. Each of the physicians on the call have been a part of this multidisciplinary group advocating broader coverage for carotid stenting, and CMS seems to be favorable in the idea, and I think that's a big change, as you pointed out, Dr. Leighton, for many years. How do you see the impact on this progress for broader use of stents with standard risk SIA patients? And, how do you feel, since you've been through this a number of years, that this is progressing? Do you think it's imminent? And once it does, how will that, impact more stenting?
So the last time in 2009, when CMS last put it out there, they said they wanted more data. They wanted long-term data. So we have more data. We have long-term data. We have equivalence data. There's a huge push with health disparities, and these things affect, patients of lesser means more than patients who could just say, I have the money, I can pay, give me what I want. I think it's really, right now, we know who should do carotid stenting, how to do carotid stenting, the best ways to do carotid stenting. And I think it's time to take it out of a national coverage decision and put it in the hands of clinicians and hospitals for credentialing committees to look at outcomes to say, can you do it? Should you keep doing it? And I believe CMS, because of the data we have, will be responsive to that.
Yeah, I would briefly echo that, Marvin. I think that now, when they ask for data and now it's provided, and you have 4 carefully done, published randomized trials directly comparing carotid endarterectomy to carotid stenting, and in all 4 their equivalent strategies, there has never been in the history of American medicine a mandate to get the more invasive procedure when the less invasive procedure may be preferred by their patients and subsidiaries, and when it's equivalent. So I think faced with this data, they now, and there's more and more folks are wanting carotid stenting. Even the surgeons are embracing that. I think that will, you can never predict a governmental agency, but I believe that they're well intentioned, and I think that I'm very optimistic. Let's put it that way. And if so, Marvin, in answer to your question, what will that do to access? Now, all of a sudden, those that weren't doing it because of some of the things that Sean talked about will now have the choice. And given the choice, I think a lot of operators are going to choose carotid stenting. And I can tell you from a long career, this patients, given the choice, if either one's equal, 99 out of 100 times, they're going to choose the stent. So if both options are there, I think that this will really change the technologies we use and the reimbursement and the number of folks being treated with the strategy.
Great. I think we have Dr. Siddiqui still on. There was a question specific to that area of acute stroke. So if he's there, I'll see if I can ask this question on behalf of the author here. So in this field of addressing acute stroke, and specifically this tandem lesion indication, if you can share your thoughts a bit more on the possibilities of how CGuard fits into that setting and also the future indication. But more importantly, do you feel that this will unpin some additional growth with transfemoral stenting with this indication? Obviously, it's a transfemoral approach. If you have thoughts on that, if we still have Dr. Siddiqui. If not, I can jump to another question. Okay. We'll hold that one then for a moment. This one comes from some of the analysts. Why will carotid stenting really take off with only equivalent rates of stroke, death, and revascularization? So that's to the broader group.
So as a surgeon, I'll sit there and say that patients are afraid of surgery. No, and even surgeons, you see a surgeon, they may know it works really well, You know, if you look at what's happened in endovascular aneurysm repair, when you can fix it through punctures percutaneously, we've seen a shift with equivalence of early outcomes, with even still maybe inferior late outcomes. 85% of the world market is done with endovascular needs. If you now have equivalent outcomes for carotid stenting, I agree with Chris. You know, if I believe they have an equivalent choice, I'm pretty sure most of my patients will choose stenting over surgery. I get so frustrated. I have to look at their insurance instead of saying, oh, I got a CAT scan and, oh, you're really calcified. You're going to be better with surgery. Or you have a type 3 arch. You're not going to be great with a transfemoral carotid stent. I can do a TCAR or surgery. And I think it really, it should be up to the skill set of the physician you see, because not every physician will be able to do all three options. If, you know, Chris is probably one of the most amazing carotid stenters I've ever seen. And, you know, if he said I was a good candidate for carotid stent, I would let him carotid stent me. I mean, you know, I think that's the difference. You know, when patients can have a say in what they get and the surgeon or interventionist feels it's an adequate therapy in their hands, we should be able to do it.
So, Sean, first of all, I'd gladly stent your carotid, just so you know. Thanks for the nice words. But I would almost turn the question around, Marvin. If they're both equivalent, why wouldn't you choose the less invasive? You don't need, so just not just a procedure. Remember, there are cranial nerve injuries and others go along with surgery. There's anesthesia and the anesthesia risk. There's the time, the length of hospitalization, and so on. So if both therapies are absolutely equivalent, not just short term, but long term, we have 10-year plus data that they're equivalent. Okay, why would you choose the more invasive unless there was an advantage to the more invasive? Sean and I and Adnan would all say, if there's heavy calcium, as a carotid stenting enthusiast, I would still be the first to call the surgeon. And Sean, just so you know, if I've got calcium up here, you can do my endarterectomy, okay? But, you know, I mean, honestly, if they're equivalent therapies, most people are going to choose the less invasive, and that has been shown time and time again. If we're talking about leg interventions, as Sean said, aneurysm, even the surgeons are choosing it 85% of the time. If they're equivalent, everyone will migrate more towards the less invasive, going home sooner with less comorbidities arm.
Great. So this is another question from one of the analysts out there. It's kind of a three-parter, but maybe you can comment on all three. Is there another situation that you're aware of where a device that has not yet gained regulatory clearance was included in a major study like CREST-2, obviously referring to our recent announcement with CGuard? Why do you think the investigators sought or are willing to use and include it? And what's your view of the likelihood of a favorable NCD given study results? And finally, in your practice, what portion of patients could be candidates for CAS? So a lot to chew on there, but.
So in terms of CREST, TCAR got added to CREST as well. It's not also approved. And so the CREST investigators have done a really good job making sure that for CREST-2, we're using what we would consider up-to-date good technology. And it's not like there's not any data with the CGuard device. As we saw, there's been 1,600 patients in clinical research trials studied over a long period of time, just not in the United States. And so I think I can't thank Tom Brott and the people running CREST-2 enough that they've allowed, you know, so we can't sit there and say, oh, it's done now, but we're using all that old stuff that's not as good. If we use the new stuff, it'd be much better. And so, you know, the trial has done this before, and they've really kept up to date to make sure we're not seen as completing a trial that's well past its prime with using old technology.
I would take slight exception to that. The only thing about different is about TCAR. TCAR is FDA approved. Okay, so Marvin, I would say that this is unprecedented what they've done for the trial. In other words, they've taken something that is not that's going through the PMA trial, the IDE trial, and before that result is out there, they believe that the technology is favorable enough, based on the European data that Sean just mentioned, and the technology, that they made as far as I know, an unprecedented decision to say, yep, it can be included even before it's FDA approved, because we believe in the technology. So I think that part is a really strong statement on behalf of, I think you're right, Sean, they were trying to do everything they can to make sure that any really good technology is offered as part of the trial, whatever the arm is. But I think that this is unprecedented in terms of a non-FDA approved device that they've chosen to allow.
Great. So we're rolling up to the top of the hour here. I guess for the purposes of time, we'll leave it at that. I don't see any other questions that we didn't cover, which is great. I just want to thank you, gentlemen, again for participating today. It's a pleasure working with you day to day, and it's been our pleasure to have you on board to make sure that there's a full understanding and education of what's happening in the carotid market. We're building a company specifically to address this market, and so we have a lot on the line, and we think it's a very good bet to place because it's time for major standard of care change. So I just want to thank everyone for their participation today, and best of luck.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Marvin, and everyone.
Thank you all.